Hi everyone, welcome to Bello's Designs. My name is Catherine and today we're going to be creating this card that I'm calling Willow's Conjuring. Now I started planning to make this card a little while ago before Lavinia announced a new release featuring more Halloween witches. So I'm hoping that if you're waiting for your new Lavinia release to arrive stateside, that this will give you a little bit of a fix to hold you over until those stamps get shipped out. These are the supplies we'll need to get started. I have a piece of multifarious cardstock trimmed down to 6 3/4 by 4 3/4. A piece of cardstock that I like to use as my base. This is 10 by 7 inches, folded in half to make 5 by 7. We'll be using the Lavinia stickers number 9, and I'll be using the jar today. We'll also be using the Hill masks from Lavinia, a variety of stamps, including the Jip, which is LAV 705, the Fairy Web, which is LAV 286, the Woodland Ferns, LAV 729, the Miniature Stars 2, LAV 212, the Mini Leaf, which is LAV 305, the Large Cork, which is LAV 906, Willow the Witch, LAV 194, and lastly, the Broomsticks, which are LAV 827. We'll also be using a variety of inks. So I have Versafine Clair and Lilac Bloom, the Versafine Clair and Portabello, Sand Dune, Nocturne, and Verdant Green. For Elements inks, we'll use the Sundance, Lime Punch, and Mulberry today. I also have a few blending brushes, so I'll be using my micro blending brush with my Mulberry, and then I have a blending brush for my Sundance and one for my Lime Punch. We'll wrap up our project with some stickles, and I'll be using lime green and lavender as a little. On an earlier project last month, I talked about stamping my cork first and then placing my bottle over the cork so that the cork would be centered in my bottle. But since we're going to be using the MISTI today, I'm not really going to worry about that. So the first thing I'm going to do is center my jar in the middle of my card. Now these sticker stencils are pretty sticky, so if it's the first time that you're using it, you might want to just press it down on some scrap paper to remove a little bit of the stick, because it can rip your card if it's too sticky. But this has been well used, so I think we're safe to avoid that today. The first step is to use my blending brushes and my Elements ink, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of a glow and some light to the inside of my jar, and I'm gonna give it just a base layer across the whole thing to help the other inks that go on top blend a little bit better. I have these cover, so now I'm going to go back in with my punch and just go around the outside of the jar. All right, I have that base cover, so now I'm going to come back in with my lime punch and just go around the outside of the jar. So now I have my base color. I'm going to use one of my masks from the Hill mask set, and I'm using the flattest one just to create a little bit of grounding for Willow the Witch. And I'm going to come back in with Lime Punch and my blending brush and just use that to create a little bit of grounding and darkness at the bottom. And there we are. The first thing we're going to stamp on the card are the leaves that go around the edge of my bottle. So I'll be stamping those with Portabello and Lilac Bloom. Now, before I bring in my MISTI, what I want to do is stamp my fairy web along the edges using a stamp block just so that I can continue to use the mask and I don't have to move the mask and try to reposition it, because sometimes it's just can be difficult to get it back in the exact spot. So I'm coming back in with my Nocturne ink and I'll ink that up and work on the spider web. So just get it nice and inky and place it right in the corner. And give it a nice even press. And I'm not going to worry about the stamp not working its way all the way to the edge, because we are going to come back in with our micro blending brush and some Elements inks just to add a little bit of darkness to the outside corners or the outside edge of our jar. So I'm going to do one more right about here because I know that I'm going to have my cork in here. A nice impression, and there we go. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. Now I think I'm going with the idea that I don't want to remove the mask until I'm finished. I am going to come back in with the Mulberry ink and the micro blending brush and just get around the outside edge. So before I do that, I'm going to use my chamois and just clean up any of the ink on the outside of my jar so that it doesn't smudge and get inside of the jar. There we go. And let's go ahead and just use our scrap paper to make sure that all of that Versafine Clair is nice and dry, because it's a slow drying ink. And if you've worked with it, you might have experienced that sometimes it will smudge a little bit. So let's try to make sure that that doesn't happen. So here we go. All right, now I'm going to just take my time blending the mulberry around the edges of my jar. So in order to create the lip on the jar, I'm going to come back in with my stencil. And this is the inside piece of the stencil, and I'm going to line it up just right across the top of my jar, just to give it a little bit of a lip. All right, now I have placed my card into the outside corner of my MISTI, and this is the feature I like the most about the MISTI. If I stamp and I have to restamp or re-ink my stamp and stamp it a second time, if my card shifts at all, I know that just by placing it right back into that corner tightly, that I'm gonna get an impression in the exact same spot. So I'm gonna place Willow the Witch right on my grass line where I'd like her to go. And we'll close the MISTI just to pick up that stamp. See that? And we've already moved just a little bit. That doesn't happen so much when there's ink on your stamp. So coming back in with the Versafine Clair Nocturne, I'm just gonna ink her up really well. Makes me really happy when I get a great impression with the first stamp. So let's go ahead, close that up, and just give the ink a minute to soak into that cardstock. All right, let's see how that looks. It looks like I missed just a couple spots right here, so I'm going to come back in and we'll do it one more time. And at least we dropped that ink pad onto the door of the MISTI and not on our finished card. All right, there we go. Just give it one more impression and a little bit of extra pressure on those spots that I know didn't stamp so well. And that's nearly perfect. We can fill in those little divots with our micro pen at the end. So let's clean off Willow. And the next stamp I'm going to bring in is the Cauldron, because I want to make sure I get lots of room to stamp that. I think it's okay to have it behind the spider web just a little bit. So once again, I'm just going to close the MISTI to pick up that stamp, inking it up with Nocturne, and I got a little bit right here on the door, and I don't want that to transfer to my project, so I'm going to wipe it off right now. There we go. Let's close it up and stamp it down. See how that comes out. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to switch it out now for the smaller broom from the Broomsticks set. It was really stuck on there. And we'll put the broom right here leaning against the edge of the jar and right next to the Cauldron. I'm pretty happy with that placement, so let's go ahead and pick it up and just stamp the broom. I'm not doing very well with that today, getting lots of ink where it doesn't belong, but that is the convenience of using your MISTI. All right, there we go with that. Before I move it out, what I'd like to do is come back in with my blending brush with the mulberry that I used around the outside, and I'm just going to darken in the broomstick a little bit with that since I already have it out. It's a pretty small brush, and we just want to darken it up a little bit, so add a little extra ink to it. Make sure it's not too much, and just use a light touch to fill in that broom. And you know, I might even do the Cauldron. That's right where that highlight is, just to give it a little bit of color. Okay. at this point, before I put the MISTI away, I think it's a good time to stamp our cork. So we'll just place that right where we'd like it to go. Close that and pick it up. And I'm going to come back in with the, I think I'm going to use the mulberry for this. So I know a lot of people don't love stamping with the Elements inks. The pad is really juicy, but I do find that I like the colors and I don't mind stamping with it. So go ahead and use your products in the way that works best for you. No judgment. There we go. Now we can just come back in with the brush and pick up a little bit of ink off of that stamp if I need to, and darken it up a little bit. And it also helps it blend with the lip of my bottle, which I made a little bit dark just to cover up some imperfections that happened while I was working on that. So I'm pretty happy with how that looks. So I'm going to clean it up, put away the MISTI. And the only thing about using red inks that are not oil-based on your stamps is that they will stain your polymer stamp. But not a big deal. It'll still work fine. I don't really care about that. Those are for my personal use. And so here we go, we'll put that away and come back and add a few finishing touches. The next thing I'm going to do is come in with my gyp stamp, and I don't have any of the new trees yet, but those will be lovely when they arrive stateside. I'm going to stamp a few images of the gyp behind Willow to give the illusion of some trees in the background. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a piece of scrap paper as a mask just to make sure it doesn't come below my ground line. And so we will ink that up in Sand Dune. And I'd like to do a second generation stamp with it. So I'm going to stamp it on my scrap paper first, and then add it to the background here. So we'll do a couple as a second generation and then come back in, because it is a very pale color, and do it again as a first generation. So there we have that. And just being careful to keep it inside of the jar because we've taken the mask off of the outside. So maybe one more on the other side of her. And again, just being aware that you're staying inside of that jar. All right, so I'm pretty happy with how that came out. So I'm going to put that aside. And the next thing I'm going to do before I cover up the inside of my jar with my mask is just to stamp the Starburst in verdant green over the cauldron so we can see the magic that Willow is conjuring up. Okay, and there we go. Pretty happy with how that came out. So let's go ahead and clean it off, and I'm going to just put it aside because we will use that again before we're finished today. So the next thing I'm going to do is come back and just mask my jar so that I can create the grounding behind it. we go. And I'm going to do that once again with the lime punch. All right, I like how dark that came out. So let's cover this up for a minute. And I'm going to use the Sundance around the outside of the jar. So coming back in with my blending brush and just coming off of the jar and bringing that color out to the background. There we go. And let's go ahead and change out our Starburst stamp for our ferns. And coming back in with the verdant green. I really like this bright green with the purple for a Halloween look. And we can do a couple peeking out behind that jar. And then a few on the other side. And let's swap it out for the bigger one because it curves in the opposite direction. And so just a few of those. And we missed the edge right there. So let's go ahead and add one more to cover that up. There we go. Okay. Before I finish, I think what I'd like to do is bring in our little star cluster and go ahead and stamp. Let's create the magic that Willow's conjuring around the outside of this jar. So we can just go ahead and ink that up in the lilac bloom and add a few starbursts around the top and the outside. And as I go around the card, I'm just twisting the stamp a little bit so I don't get the exact same repeating pattern all the way around. Okay. I think it's safe to remove the mask. We are done with that. So again, just being careful because we don't want to lift off any of our finished card with the adhesive on the back of the mask. If you need to, you can use your heat tool just to warm it up a little bit. Okay, I'm seeing a little bit of a white line right here. So I'm going to come back in with my micro brush, and which already has the mulberry on it, and let's go ahead and just add a little bit of a shadow under here. Just add a little bit of ink to that. And I think it's safe to come back in with one of our chalk pastel pencils, and I'm going to bring out, let's see, I think I'm going to go with the black just to add a little bit of shadow underneath my ferns, a little bit of blending, and then we can come in here. Just add a little bit of depth. So you're going to want to add these, quite possibly, to your supplies list, just to finish that up. All right, let me just clean off my hands because I don't want to get any of this on my card. And let's bring our stickles in, and we can add those finishing touches with the stickles. Now I'm going to add the lime green to the bubbles coming out of my cauldron here. A little bit there, just to give them a little bit of sparkle. And then if you want to, you could even add a few extra coming off the top of that cauldron, just with stickles. Okay. Now with the purple, I'm just going to add a little bit of sparkle just right up the sides of the inside of the jar. And I think for this card, I'm thinking I'm going to avoid doing it on the outside stars, but I might change my mind and come back and add that in. I just love the look of purple and green together for Halloween colors. I don't know if any of you have your favorite color combinations. Maybe you could share them in the comments. But here we go. And I think I am going to come back and add just a little sparkle around the outside, but not necessarily in the stamps. So we'll just add some little sparkly purple orbs out here on the outside of our bottle. There we go. Okay, I hope you can see that sparkle in the camera. And I'm going to give this some time to dry, and then I will come back in and we will finish assembling our. All right, my card has had some time to dry, and I have used my Sweet Petunia glue press to assemble it to my card base. And while it was drying, I did go ahead and create a coordinating envelope using some of the leftover ink that was left on my blending brushes and the stamps that we used on our card. Now, before we made this card today, of course, I practiced a little bit to come up with a design I liked. So I thought I would share with you some of the alternatives that I made. So if you're looking to make it a little bit different, Here's one I made last week, and I believe it was the Lisa Horton Anthracite ink that I used around the outside edge of the card, and I added a spider web to the outside and some different leaves to get the look of a forest tree hanging over. And then previously we had made this 8x8 card using multifarious 7x7 and placed on an 8x8 card base. So I'm not sure which one you would like to try, but of course you can use the inks that you like with this design. You might want to switch up the colors and swap out some of the stamps for different stamps that you have at home. I hope you enjoyed crafting with me today, and I want to thank you for coming. If you're not already a member of our Facebook groups, please consider joining Del Bello's Designs Lounge, where you can share your projects featuring Lavinia Stamps, or Del Bello's a la carte for other stamp lines that Del Bello's sells. Bye-bye. Have a great day.